Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Prenatal Wellness Talks one more time. Today, I have with me Matthew Appleton, who has been working extensively with babies and children to uncover early imprints from birth and even in utero experiences. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about today. Hi, Matthew. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Can you start by telling our audience a little bit about yourself and your work?
Well, my background is in psychotherapy, specifically body-based psychotherapy and in craniosacral therapy. And I've been in practice now for about 30 years. And I teach integrative baby therapy, which I've taught in various different European countries. And now we've got an international community of people doing this work with families, with their babies and children, and indeed with adults relating to their prenatal life and birth and how it has lifelong consequences.
And what, regarding our main topic that brought us here today, what are some of the most common patterns that you have observed in babies that reflect that early trauma?
Well, we see a lot of birth issues with babies, and the way that we work with this and engage with that is to recognize that babies have a story to tell. And of course, babies cannot say, "Hi, mom, this was a little bit difficult for me in the birth. I need you to understand this." But they do actually say that through their body language and through their emotional expressions. So very often we are seeing birth-related themes, which babies are showing us. We also see themes related to prenatal life, particularly their relationship with the umbilical cord. And of course, we think of the umbilical cord from a biological perspective and physiological perspective, what its functions are, but actually it's relational as well. And even going back to very early cellular memories connected with implantation, conception, we can see these two show up again through very specific body language. And what I really want to stress is this body language has been mapped out over decades by different practitioners. So what I'm working with is not like something I discovered, it's something that I'm continuing to develop, but which there have been many people predating me really
Can you
developing.
can you share some of that experience that you had? What are the body expressions that you can see on a baby? How come, is it couples that come to you with the babies? What are usually their issues or something that you think that would be wonderful to share with us for our audience to understand that sometimes there are patterns that parents think that it's just normal, and this has to do with early imprints.
So I think the most common reasons are things like inconsolable crying, babies not being able to settle, bonding issues, and there may be many variations, sleep issues, for example. And when parents come, what I like to do is open up an inquiry with them. I make the point, I'm not an expert who's going to try and fix anything. I'm not the expert who's going to tell you what you should do. I'm going to work with you to get curious about what your baby may be showing that maybe you're not seeing. In that the baby is the expert. Now, when we open up this inquiry, we work systemically, so we include the family because many families are struggling with things left over from the birth as well, both mothers and fathers. They may have felt helpless, overpowered, overwhelmed in various different ways. And so we give time for that. And actually babies it can be a relief for babies when parents are able to tell their experiences and let go of some of the stress they may still be holding. And then at some stage, I normally say, "Can I pay attention to your baby? Is that okay?" And I get down to the level of the baby. I want to come into the world of the baby. It's like I don't expect the baby to come into my world. It's like I'm coming into your world. I'm curious. What have you got to show me? Now, one thing, for example, a baby might be doing something like this. Now you can see the baby. I'm moving my head from side to side and rubbing my eye. Now that's what we call baby body language. It's related to a very specific phase of the birth, which is the rotational stage, where the baby is down in the pelvis and is rotating to find the way through. And if the baby is, for example, crying with that, then I will mirror that crying. Like, oh, yeah, you got really stuck there. It was really difficult. You got very lost. I can see you're really, really scared. And I mirrored the language. Oh, yeah, that was really difficult. Now, babies, when they realize that you're listening to them and you get what they're showing, they deeply engage. I mean, that's something that parents often say, wow, my baby's really engaged with you. And it's not because I'm doing anything magical. I'm just there present and I understand there's a story. Now, what very often happens is if there is crying, and we call this crying memory crying because the baby's remembering, they're feeling something in their body. It's not remembering like in a narrative way, like, if I ask you what you had for breakfast, you could probably tell me what you had for breakfast. It's more a body memory. And so it's like we come into emotional resonance with the baby so they're not holding the story on their own. And so what often happens is if there is crying, it gets louder initially. And this is the tricky part. Because if someone's really listening to you, what you're feeling, you feel it more initially. But then when the baby has shared that experience and feels the emotional resonance, then the baby lets go. So, I can relax. All the inner tension disappears. The body language will often just stop because the story's been told, it's been met, they don't need to do it. And the inconsolable crying either reduces or disappears completely. Sometimes one session, a huge amount can shift. Sometimes it takes a few sessions.
It's amazing the things that you are talking about because it feels it's a little bit like psychology. So when you feel that you are seen, that you are acknowledged, that the situation was seen, and as the baby feels that you are seeing it as the expert here. I love when you said that the baby is the expert because you're translating the signals of the baby to our own reality, that if I can say, to the parents' reality. So it feels like when they feel that they are seen, that issue was really addressed, then it shifts. In the same way as us in adults, when we are in psychology and psychotherapy, the first we need to acknowledge the situation and then it can be transformed. Is that the way that you see your work?
Absolutely, and I would say further than being seen. It's about feeling felt. Somebody is feeling what I'm feeling, and they're sharing that experience. And you said this is like psychology. Well, it is psychology, but of course, normally we think of psychology as being narrative and talking. And it was my basis in body psychotherapy, which enabled me to get really curious about pre-verbal states, going right back to womb life. And it's exactly the same. Babies are whole human beings. They're not immature human beings waiting to grow up to be, something else. They are whole human beings with a whole range of emotions and because we often don't engage with them in that way, we often treat them like they're these empty, blank slate is the term often used, and we need to fill them. That's so incorrect. So I would actually go so far to say we have a very incorrect view of what babies are in our culture generally.
And in your view, how does this prenatal and birth experience has been shaping the children's emotional and relational development later in life?
Well, it's the foundational basis for everything else. So because we were looking very much at the body, we're looking at feeling tones, we're looking at stress levels, we're looking at the inner world of sensation and emotion. Now, every belief we have about ourselves and the world arises out of those embodied experiences. And the map that we work with to understand these early territories is based on working with the babies, the children, and with the adults. And we see the same body language with adults. To some degree, it's been diminished because, you know, that story was never engaged with, and to some degree, it's far more unconscious than with babies. Although we could, in a way, say babies are just speaking directly from their unconscious. But we've been able to see that lifelong consequences, and for example, with birth, a lot of themes around transitions later on in life show up around birth, around prenatal issues with the umbilical relationship. We see that shows up in later relationships, not only with people, but specifically with things like food. And of course, we're feeding through there, and with things like money, because money is a resource we get from our environment, and things like our relationship with the environment itself. Now, these are profoundly shaped by our early experiences.
It's impressive. Can you share with us a moment that have moved you? Maybe when we were actually, just starting, and suddenly you see that there was this shift in the child, this profound shift for the well-being and also in the behavior of the child.
I can one little girl I worked with very early on where she was really struggling a lot, crying a lot. She had ear infections, chest infections. She'd been born, I think I said she was a twin, and her and her twin were born slightly premature. She was in the intensive care for a little while. So she'd been very isolated. There was bonding issues therefore with the mom. The mom described it like she would get really angry very quickly. And when I worked with her, I just paid attention to her. I started to mirror her body language. What's your story? And she went into a stage of the birth, and this was connected with being stuck at the pelvic outlet, not being able to move forward so easily, just very, very stuck and very overwhelmed. And we talk about an imprint. It's like a constellation of intense emotion and embodied experience around this particular stage. And she went back into this particular birth position again and again. She cried very extremely, and me and her mother were with her, and we would just be with her in that, and then help her up to get a little bit more resourced with us. And then she'd go back into it. And then at the end, she was exploring, she was moving my hand. And very often what babies will do is if there was a place they were stuck and we make a contact there, they'll often touch that place. So I'll ask permission from the parents and the baby, can we explore there? And she was about 2 years old, actually, almost 2 years old. And so I put my hand there and she pushed my hand away. And it's like here she was empowered, whereas in the birth experience, she was overwhelmed. She was helpless because this hand was like the maternal bone. So she pushed the hand away and she really was smile. Oh, I can do this. I don't have to feel helpless and stuck here. And we worked with this in one session for about 20 minutes. And her behavior changed quite dramatically after that. Instead of getting angry very, very quickly, she was regulating her emotions much more easily. And it was a great revelation for the mother. And in fact, the mother later trained to become a therapist because she was so impressed by what her baby had to show her. So yeah, that's just one example of many I can give, and I just thought of that one because it was one of my early ones. And the babies have been great teachers for me, by the way.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. I have three children, and I think the same way. You talked a little bit about, how we work on our relationships, even with the relation with money. You talked about, that the early imprints can actually define the way that we relate with things in our life as adults. I know that you work with children, but because you mentioned that, have you seen um, that that work being done with adults? Is there any way that we can address as adults what was happened in the early imprints we had in pregnancy or even at birth? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with hundreds of adults in thousands of sessions, both in workshops and in my private practice. And in fact, as part of our training to work with babies, you have to work with your own birth and prenatal story. So, uh, one reason that's important is if we haven't worked with that story, when we work with babies, our own unheard story can get stimulated, and we can get easily overwhelmed. So, and I work with people from all ages, from 20, well, I mean, all ages, teenagers, 20s, 30, right through to people in their 60s and 70s come and work with me. And we do see quite profound changes from these. In fact, I just did one recently working with the umbilical relationship, and somebody on the course said, after a couple of days of working with that, she had a very sweet tooth before. That's an English expression, like loving really sweet things, and she was drinking and eating the usual things, and they felt too sweet. Suddenly, she didn't need all that sweetness. We've had people give up cigarettes, quite spontaneously smoking, give up because it didn't feel right for them after doing work around their umbilical themes. And I just had finished with a group of people just when COVID kicked in. And that gave me a chance to do a little bit of research to see how doing this work, they'd done a whole training with me to be baby therapists and with their own experiential work. So we did this, I did this research just to see how they felt the impact of what was happening with COVID was changed, or what they saw might be different because of the work they'd done. And they said, they could understand when they could see meaning in the way they were responding. For example, if you're not allowed out, you can imagine if somebody got very stuck in the birth and it was hard to get out, that could get stimulated. And they were able to recognize, this is my birth theme getting stimulated. It's not happening now. So they could regulate their emotions better around it. They have more compassion for other people who were getting very stimulated. Their own birth stories were getting stimulated. And there were a whole series of things we were seeing through this research, that just knowing their birth stories and having worked with them, and we worked with them in a very embodied way, gave them a more spacious and we could say a much more present moment adult relationship with what was happening when all the COVID restrictions came in.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm so happy that I made you that question. And so how do you think that parents, maternal health professionals can support a healthy bonding and emotional regulation in the earliest months of life, especially when birth has been challenging for mother and for baby?
Well, we see a lot of fear around birth, and I'm always a little careful to talk about birth more generally. I generally am here to advocate for the baby, but of course I'm working with moms, I'm working with dads, I'm supporting them. But certainly one of the things I say is, people need to find the way of giving birth that's right for them, and there's no absolute right way for everyone. But I think recognizing there is a lot of fear, and maybe to get curious about that, maybe question that is one aspect. Find people around you who can support you in your choices, not people that are just going to feed you full of fears. And one of the things I've come to profoundly respect in pregnant women and moms is when at the beginning of the pregnancy, consciousness changes. Women go into different states of consciousness, and that can actually really help them to connect in with the baby. I mean, nature is so wise, and the baby is a sentient being from the beginning. But our culture doesn't give much space for that. It's like you have to keep busy. You have to keep going. So one thing I would say is make space to connect with yourself, connect with the baby from the beginning. Because actually what happens at birth is the baby already brings that prenatal experience to it. And so if the baby really trusts in the relationship, if the parents have been listening, and dads too, please, dads get engaged as well. Listen, connect in with the baby at a heart level, at an intuitive level. We're very left brain in our culture, but get into the body, get into the feeling, connect with the baby. That brings more trust to the baby in birth as well. And then birth itself is a relational process, and it's meant to be a struggle. This is a great thing about the baby's experience that I've really learned from babies. When they engage with the difficulties of birth, the struggles of birth, and they feel supported in that and they find their way through, they come out like they're powerful. I made it. It's like crossing the finish line in a race. Yes. And we should celebrate that with babies, and we should acknowledge that they've been on this profound journey. They're conscious human beings, and so often they're objectified. They're reduced to, just biological entities rather than fully conscious human beings. So empathy for the baby, connection with the baby. And I would say the deepest wound that most of us carry in our culture is that we felt very alone because nobody was really engaging with us at that deep, intuitive, heartfelt level.
You often speak about, how our babies are conscious beings. And what do you think are the implications of this perspective and the way that we care for them? Because not only in the pregnancy settings, also in the birth settings, and I would say even in the educational system, because I think if the educational system understood that there was a life before birth, um, things maybe would change. So, how do you think? What are the implications of having this approach to unborn babies?
Well, as well as doing my own work, I've studied the different traditions. And in many indigenous traditions, there is this real understanding of consciousness, of in some traditions, preparing for conception. If you have someone who's going to come and stay with you, you tend to prepare the house. So if we could do that, both consciously and in terms of how we look after ourselves, and I think again, I really want to say that I don't think all the burden should be on mothers. I think, fathers and the wider culture need to actually embrace this. That we prepare, that we recognize that there is consciousness, and many mothers do, and many mothers get kind of belittled. Oh, you're talking nonsense. It's kind of that needs to be supported and honored, and we need to do it through programs like yours, and through developing communities that can support this, that the baby is conscious. So we welcome in the baby at conception, we welcome in the baby at birth, we connect in with the baby. I mean, in a way, this is quite simple, but it means changing the way we look. And if we can change the way we look, it will change the world. And actually, from the studies I've seen of different cultures, the cultures that are more based in this approach to early life, they're much more peaceful, a lot less hierarchical. Um, and I would say a lot of the violence, a lot of the problems we see in the world today are created by the way that our own nature has been insulted from the very beginning.
It's very interesting to know that, and also to think if we are already at the level of consciousness, of openness of our consciousness to understand this, that babies are conscious and that they are bringing a heritage with them as they are being built in the mother's womb and also as they are born. And to someone that who is new in this field, that it's listening about this for the first time, what would you recommend as the first step to learning to recognize and respond to the baby's somatic communication, to the body communication, and to deeper emotional needs that the baby is expressing?
Well, I mean, there are various books out there, and one of the first books I ever read was The Secret Life of the Unborn Child by Thomas Verney. I read that about 30 years ago. Um, and there are various associations like, like your own alliance, which, people can connect with. I think we need community. I've written a book, Transitions to Wholeness, which goes into a lot of detail about this. I'm working on a parent's book. Um, there are various videos online. So I think finding community, like-minded people, getting different information from different places. Don't just accept the mainstream information, because I mean, there can be very good information there, but in some ways it can be lacking. And in a way, we need to counter that or bring in the other element, because it does tend to come from a rather reductionist, materialistic perspective, which just views these very early relationships in biological terms and not psychological terms. So I think to actually, yeah, community, different forms of information are really helpful. I'd like to say one other thing as well about this, and which I feel quite strongly about, is because one of the dangers of becoming more aware of this is that for mums it can put pressure that pregnancy and birth have to be perfect. And actually, they don't. And in fact, even in pregnancy, some stress can be very helpful. We know this now for the unborn child. And we work with the model of rupture and repair. It's like if there are ruptures in the relationship because of a lot of stress or things needing attention that the parents can't be so available, then as long as it doesn't go on too long or too severe, then the baby can learn, okay, it's like there may be difficulty, but I can overcome it. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And I really don't want any mom or dad to feel that pressure. But it's like we can repair ruptures in the relationship by going back and saying, oh, I'm sorry about that. That was hard for you, whether it was at the birth, whether it was prenatally, or you may have felt I was really angry right then. It wasn't you, it was the Amazon delivery man who who messed up my parcel, something like that.
And one of the things that I think is so beautiful about your work is that you work with continuity, with union of body and mind. And usually in our duality world, which is what is wrong, what is right, what is love, what is fear, what is transformation, what is settlement, and in a way that you work, it's uniting, integrating, because it's all one. The body and the mind are connected internally. It's not just about working with one thing or just working with the other. Let's work with both. And it's beautiful that you're doing such beautiful, beautiful work. Thank you so much, Matthew, for being with us today. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure, and I wish you and everybody involved in this work all the best.